I thought I knew the man I shared my life with for 8 years. Then came a Tuesday afternoon when he walked in with a strange woman, demanded I make tea, and declared her the new owner of our house. He thought her family wealth would effortlessly crush me. What he did not realize was the secret I held could completely obliterate his entire delusional world. I was about to teach him the ultimate price of betrayal. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Violet Holmes. It was exactly 3:15 in the afternoon when the heavy oak front door of our suburban house swung open. I was sitting at the dining table, my fingers moving steadily across my laptop keyboard as I finalized a complex financial model. The afternoon sun cast long, quiet shadows across the hardwood floor, creating a serene atmosphere that I had always appreciated. That peaceful silence shattered into a million irreversible pieces the second Arthur walked in. He was not alone. Behind him trailed a woman who looked as though she had walked straight out of a cheap, heavily scripted reality television show. She wore a tight, blindingly bright crimson dress that left very little to the imagination, paired with oversized designer sunglasses that she inexplicably kept on inside the dim hallway. The heavy, cloying scent of an overly sweet synthetic floral perfume hit my senses, suffocating the air before she even spoke a single word. She clung possessively to Arthur's arm, her posture screaming an unearned sense of absolute entitlement. Arthur did not flinch. He did not look away in shame, nor did he display an ounce of the guilt one might expect from a cheating husband caught in the act. Instead, he stood incredibly tall, puffing out his chest with a look of absolute, arrogant triumph. He pointed a rigid finger at me and demanded I stop exactly what I was doing, pack my personal belongings, and leave the house by the end of the week. He stood right in the middle of a living room funded by a staggering mortgage that he could barely afford to pay the monthly interest on, declaring with absolute confidence that this garish woman, Stella, was his one true love. He called her his ultimate salvation, the woman who was finally going to change his mediocre life and elevate him to the high society status he always falsely believed he deserved. Stella released his arm and began to pace around the living room with exaggerated, theatrical steps. Her sharp stiletto heels clicked obnoxiously against the wooden floorboards, echoing loudly against the walls. She trailed a perfectly manicured, bright red fingernail across the back of my favorite linen armchair, curling her glossed lip in sheer, unfiltered disgust. She scoffed, her voice a grating, high-pitched whine that instantly irritated the ears. "Arthur, darling, you actually lived in this miserable little box?" she asked, looking directly at me as if I were a repulsive stain on the rug. "Everything here looks so incredibly cheap. It is terribly outdated. My father's staff quarters have infinitely better taste than this tragic setup. I truly cannot believe you endured such a low-class, pathetic lifestyle for so long." I remained perfectly still in my chair. I did not close my laptop right away. I let my cold gaze drift from the aggressive crimson of her dress to the smug, arrogant smirk plastered on my husband's face. Arthur took a bold step forward, towering over the dining table to deliver his final definitive threat. He leaned in close, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding tone meant to inspire fear. "Listen to me very carefully. Violet, you are not going to make a scene, and you are certainly not going to fight me on the divorce papers. Stella's father owns half the real estate in this entire city. He is a literal titan in the industry. If you try to drag this out in court, or if you try to take a single dime from my assets, her family will crush you until you have absolutely nothing left. Do we understand each other?" They expected a dramatic reaction. They wanted pathetic tears, hysterical screaming, or perhaps a desperate breakdown where I fell to my knees and begged him to stay. People like Arthur feed on the raw desperation of others to validate their own pathetic choices, but I gave them absolutely nothing. My heart rate did not elevate by a single beat. My breathing remained perfectly measured and slow. I sat there in the freezing, chilling silence, absorbing every single insult, every arrogant boast, and every hollow, meaningless threat. I committed their exact words, their facial expressions, and their sheer audacity to my permanent memory. I was mentally cataloging their weapons, analyzing the battlefield, and knowing exactly how fragile they truly were. Slowly, I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped softly against the floor. I stood up, completely ignoring Stella's existence, and looked directly into Arthur's eyes. My expression was an absolute void, empty of any recognizable human emotion. I picked up my laptop and my neatly stacked files, holding them securely against my chest. I turned toward the staircase, taking slow, deliberate, heavy steps. Just before my foot hit the first carpeted step, I paused. I looked back over my shoulder, letting the suffocating silence stretch for just a moment longer. "Arthur," I said, my voice eerily calm, completely devoid of any anger or sorrow. "Are you absolutely certain about this choice?" Arthur let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed terribly through the house. He wrapped his arm tightly around Stella's waist, pulling her flush against him. "It is the smartest decision of my entire life, Violet. Now get upstairs and start packing your cheap clothes." I did not offer a single word in reply. I continued my walk up the stairs, my face turning into a cold, unbreakable mask of pure stone. I walked straight into the master bedroom, closed the heavy wooden door behind me, and firmly turned the brass lock. The satisfying click of the mechanism echoed loudly in the quiet room. I set my laptop down on the edge of the bed. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I reached deep into my pocket, pulled out my personal phone, and immediately dialed a highly secure New York number. It was time to call my uncle. The sun had not yet risen when I zipped up my single leather duffel bag. It was exactly 5:30 in the morning. I did not wait for the end of the week as Arthur had demanded. I had no desire to breathe the same contaminated air as the two oblivious fools currently sleeping in the guest room. I moved through the quiet house like a ghost, collecting only the essential items that truly belonged to me: my expensive electronics, my encrypted hard drives, and a few select garments. I left behind all the cheap, ordinary things I had bought to maintain the illusion of our mundane middle-class life. Before walking out the front door, I placed my house key precisely in the dead center of the dining table. I did not leave a dramatic letter. I did not scribble an angry note. Silence is the most terrifying weapon you can leave behind for a narcissist, because it gives them absolutely nothing to react to. A sleek black town car was already waiting for me at the curb. The driver nodded respectfully and took my bag. 30 minutes later, the elevator doors opened onto the top floor of a towering glass skyscraper in the financial district. This was the headquarters of Viridian Apex Solutions. To Arthur, I was just a mid-level accountant pushing papers at a boring logistics firm. He had no idea that Viridian Apex was an elite, shadow financial advisory syndicate specializing in aggressive corporate acquisitions and ruthless liquidations. We handled the kind of multi-billion-dollar mergers that routinely destroyed lives and reshaped entire industries overnight. I walked past the biometric security scanners and entered my expansive corner office. The panoramic view of the waking city below felt fitting. It was time to hunt. I ordered a black espresso, booted up my encrypted terminal, and bypassed the standard legal channels to access our deep financial databases. I started with my soon-to-be ex-husband. I typed Arthur's full name into the search bar, cross-referencing it with my own social security number and our supposed joint accounts. What I found within the first 10 minutes made my blood turn entirely to ice. Arthur had not just been cheating on me physically. He had been committing severe financial fraud. Page after page of hidden bank statements and encrypted ledgers materialized on my screen. He had blatantly forged my signature and used my pristine credit score as collateral to secure a series of massive, high-interest personal loans over the past 18 months. The total amount was staggering. He had taken out exactly $350,000 in my name. I tracked the outbound transactions with methodical precision. The money had not gone toward our mortgage or anything practical. It had funded an extravagant, pathetic double life. There were receipts for five-star hotel suites, lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, and a down payment on a luxury sports car that I had never even seen. He had literally stolen my financial identity to afford the illusion of wealth required to impress a shallow woman like Stella. He thought he was brilliant, utilizing a loophole he thought I was too stupid to ever discover. He had handed me the exact rope I needed to hang him. But I was not finished. My focus shifted from the parasite to the host. I opened a new search query and entered the name of Stella's father, the so-called real estate titan who supposedly owned half the city. Arthur had spoken of him with such religious reverence, banking his entire future on this man's alleged fortune. I activated the firm's proprietary asset tracking software, bypassing public records to dig into the actual corporate structures, offshore holding companies, and hidden liability sheets. As the data compiled and populated my monitors, a slow, dark smile crept across my face. The mighty empire was a complete and utter illusion. Stella's father was not a titan. He was a desperate, sinking rat. His entire real estate portfolio was horribly over-leveraged. He had taken out massive loans against properties that were rapidly depreciating in value. He owed millions of dollars in unpaid taxes and was currently defaulting on 3 separate commercial development loans. The numbers flashing in bright red across my screen indicated that his operation was running on fumes, essentially functioning as a desperate shell game waiting for a slight breeze to knock it all down. His company was drowning in an ocean of toxic debt, and he was completely out of lifelines. However, the true masterpiece of this entire situation was revealed when I traced the origin of his largest, most critical debt. I followed the money trail upward, tracking the aggressive hedge fund that had recently bought out all of his outstanding loans and was actively preparing to initiate a hostile takeover of his entire portfolio. The primary creditor preparing to foreclose on Stella's family, the entity about to strip her father of every single asset he falsely claimed to own, was a massive private equity firm. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed in the empty office. That specific private equity firm was the central holding company managed directly by my family. It was the exact organization run by the uncle I had called the previous afternoon. Arthur had bet his entire life on a sinking ship, completely unaware that the woman he just threw away was the very person commanding the storm. I picked up my desk phone and dialed my internal legal team. It was time to tighten the noose. Exactly 14 days after I walked out of that house, a thick, heavy manila envelope was hand-delivered to the concierge of the luxury high-rise apartment I had temporarily leased. Inside was the formal dissolution of our marriage, drafted with a level of sheer audacity that honestly impressed me. I sat on my velvet sofa, sipping sparkling water, and read through the clauses with a mixture of clinical fascination and absolute disgust. Arthur had actually proposed a settlement where I would assume 100% of the marital debt. This explicitly included the $350,000 in fraudulent loans he had secretly secured using my stolen identity. Furthermore, the document demanded that I immediately relinquish all legal claims to any equity in our shared suburban home, leaving him free to live there permanently with his new mistress. To enforce this ridiculous piece of fiction, Arthur had hired a high-profile divorce attorney known throughout the city for his aggressive, borderline unethical intimidation tactics. This was a man who famously charged over $1,000 an hour simply to bully financially weaker spouses into terrifying submission. He thought a fancy letterhead, a terrifying reputation, and a mountain of legal jargon would frighten me into signing my life away without a single fight. The mandatory mediation meeting took place on a Tuesday morning at the attorney's opulent downtown office. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit, my demeanor entirely unreadable and completely detached. The office smelled of expensive leather polish and stale arrogance. Arthur sat across the expansive mahogany conference table, practically vibrating with unearned confidence. He wore a brand new designer suit that I knew for a fact was purchased with the credit he had stolen from me. His lawyer, a slick man with greased hair, slid the thick document across the polished wood toward me, confidently placing a heavy gold-plated pen right beside it. "Sign here, and you can walk away today without this getting unnecessarily messy," the lawyer stated smoothly, offering a patronizing, entirely fake smile. "My client is being incredibly generous by not pursuing spousal support. Considering your limited income capabilities, I did not reach for the pen. I did not even look at the lawyer. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on Arthur. I pushed the heavy document back across the table with a single, deliberate movement of my hand. "I will not be signing a single page of this garbage," I said, my voice perfectly level and echoing clearly in the quiet room. "Instead, my personal legal representation will be filing a formal motion in the economic court by the end of business today. I am pressing severe criminal charges against you, Arthur, for felony financial fraud and the explicit forgery of my signature on multiple banking instruments." The smug, victorious smirk instantly vanished from Arthur's face, rapidly replaced by a dark, ugly red flush of pure rage. He slammed his fist violently onto the table, making the crystal water glasses rattle against the wood. "You are completely bluffing," he spat, leaning aggressively across the table as if trying to physically intimidate me. "You are nothing but a lowly, pathetic paper-pushing accountant. You do not have the money to afford a basic parking ticket, let alone fund a drawn-out legal battle against someone like me. You are out of your depth. Stella's family has more power in their spare change than you will ever see in your entire pathetic lifetime. If you dare to push this forward, they will personally see to it that you are completely and utterly destroyed. They will crush you." I simply stood up, calmly smoothing the front of my jacket. I looked down at him as if he were a bug on the pavement. "We will see about that," I replied coldly. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving the two of them stewing in their own toxic, fragile arrogance. Upon returning to my actual domain at Viridian Apex, the atmosphere shifted from defense to absolute offense. I bypassed my office and walked directly into the executive war room. I immediately convened a mandatory meeting with my senior legal directors and top-tier forensic accountants. I want every single piece of evidence regarding Arthur's financial transactions fully documented, legally authenticated, and prepared for immediate prosecution. I instructed the room of elite professionals: trace every dollar, pull the bank surveillance, and leave absolutely no stone unturned. I want an airtight criminal case built within 48 hours. Then, I turned my attention to the head of my corporate acquisitions department. And regarding the target real estate portfolio owned by our supposed industry titan, Stella's father, accelerate the timeline immediately, cut off all avenues for refinancing, and block his access to any secondary credit markets. I want the total, hostile acquisition of his entire company finalized and legally locked down by the end of this month. Box them in from every possible angle, and spring the trap. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in loud, desperate delusion. Arthur and Stella aggressively launched their relationship into the public eye, plastering their newfound romance across every single social media platform available. My feed, through the sheer unavoidable force of mutual connections, was constantly bombarded with their carefully curated, sickeningly sweet photographs. There they were, clinking crystal champagne flutes on rented luxury yachts, dining at exclusive rooftop restaurants that required reservations exactly 6 months in advance, and hosting lavish, ostentatious parties at their private country club. They were burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars, financing this extravagant lifestyle through a fresh series of high-yield, catastrophic loans Arthur had somehow managed to secure under his new, incredibly fragile business entity. They were dancing wildly on the edge of a massive financial cliff, utterly convinced they were flying. But Arthur was not satisfied with merely flaunting his new mistress. He needed to completely rewrite history to justify his betrayal. He launched a vicious, calculated smear campaign against me across prominent local business forums and professional networking sites. He spun a pathetic, fictional narrative where he was the suffocated, ambitious visionary, and I was the bitter, financially illiterate anchor dragging him down. He painted me as a terrible, unsupportive wife who lacked the intellectual capacity to understand his grand entrepreneurial dreams. He claimed I had tried to steal his hard-earned money during our separation, forcing him to take extreme legal action just to protect his livelihood. The poison worked exactly as he intended on the weak-minded. A significant number of our mutual acquaintances, people I had hosted for dinner and considered close friends for over 8 years, swallowed his lies completely hook, line, and sinker. My phone suddenly grew painfully quiet. Dinner invitations completely stopped. When I encountered former friends at the local coffee shop, they would abruptly turn their heads, whispering behind their hands, actively choosing to publicly ostracize me. A few even had the sheer audacity to send me condescending messages, criticizing my supposed greed and telling me I should be deeply ashamed for trying to ruin a good man like Arthur. Through every single vicious rumor, through every fabricated post and turned back, I maintained a wall of absolute, impenetrable silence. I did not post a single rebuttal. I did not text anyone to defend my honor. I let them believe whatever convenient lie made them feel comfortable. While Arthur was busy playing the victorious victim for an audience of fools, I was spending my days in locked conference rooms with top-tier investigators from the Federal Economic Crimes Division. My desk was buried under mountains of heavily redacted bank statements, forensic audit reports, and sworn affidavits. We were not just building a case, we were forging an ironclad, inescapable prison for him. Every single lie he posted online was just another nail I quietly hammered into his coffin. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, the ultimate piece of his arrogant puzzle arrived on my desk. It was an excessively thick, heavily perfumed envelope sealed with dark red wax. Inside was a ridiculously ornate, gold-foiled invitation. Arthur was officially launching his brand-new, independent investment firm. The invitation proudly boasted that the highlight of the evening would be the live, public signing of a multi-million-dollar partnership contract with Stella's father, the supposedly invincible real estate magnate. Tucked beneath the formal card was a handwritten note from Arthur himself. The sharp, aggressive strokes of his pen practically screamed off the heavy paper. Violet, I am extending this personal invitation because I truly want you to be there. I want you to witness exactly what I am capable of achieving now that I am finally free of your mediocrity. Come see what real wealth and true power look like. It might be educational for you. He wanted an audience. He wanted to stand on a brightly lit stage, surrounded by the wealthy elite of the city, and look down at me in the crowd. He wanted to use the most important night of his pathetic career to humiliate me one final time, to definitively prove that he had won, and I was nothing but a discarded, defeated memory. I read the note twice, my face completely devoid of any reaction. I reached for my heavy brass pen, pulled the formal response card toward me, and neatly checked the box to formally accept the invitation. I slipped it into the return envelope and handed it directly to my assistant to mail out immediately. That evening, I left the office early. I walked into an exclusive boutique downtown and purchased a breathtaking, elegantly structured black silk dress. It was completely unadorned, relying solely on flawless tailoring and a razor-sharp silhouette. It was not a dress meant for celebrating a new beginning. It was cold, striking, and entirely merciless. I stood in front of the tall dressing room mirror, tracing the sleek lines of the dark fabric, perfectly preparing myself for the final battle. Arthur wanted me to witness a spectacle, and I was more than happy to oblige. I was going to attend his grand, triumphant celebration, fully dressed and prepared for his absolute funeral. The grand ballroom of the Grand Heritage Hotel was a suffocating monument to unearned arrogance and borrowed wealth. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening when the main event officially commenced, drawing a highly curated crowd of the city elite, local financial tycoons, and hungry media representatives armed with flashing cameras. Arthur had spared absolutely no expense, or rather, he had spared none of his newly acquired, highly fraudulent credit. The cavernous room was aggressively and almost comically decorated. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a harsh, glittering light over imported, exotic floral arrangements that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars to assemble. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated endlessly through the dense crowd, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with overflowing glasses of vintage French champagne, rare imported caviar, and ridiculous, gold leaf-coated hors d'oeuvres. It was a theatrical display of extreme financial gluttony, a fragile, hollow house of cards desperately disguised as an impenetrable fortress of legitimate wealth. I arrived exactly 45 minutes late, perfectly timing my entrance for maximum psychological disruption. When I stepped through the towering, velvet-draped double doors at the top of the grand staircase, the immediate, visceral shift in the room was palpable. I wore the impeccably tailored black silk dress I had purchased precisely for this execution. It clung perfectly to my frame, devoid of any cheap embellishments, radiating a cold, untouchable power. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless style, and my expression was permanently locked into a mask of absolute glacial indifference. As I slowly glided down the carpeted stairs into the main reception area, heads instantly began to turn. Frantic whispers rippled through the dense crowd like a freezing wind. I clearly saw the familiar faces of the mutual acquaintances who had so eagerly participated in Arthur's vicious social media smear campaign against me. The arrogant smirks vanished from their faces the exact second they made direct eye contact with me. They had fully expected to see a broken, defeated woman hiding in the corner. Instead, they were physically paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming authority radiating from every single deliberate step I took. They instinctively parted, shuffling backward and creating a wide, absolutely silent path for me as I walked purposefully toward the very center of the ballroom. I had barely claimed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter when a blinding flash of emerald green silk aggressively blocked my path. It was Stella. She was dripping in borrowed diamonds, her chest puffed out with the aggressive, territorial energy of a highly threatened animal. She stepped deliberately into my personal space, clutching a crystal champagne flute tightly in her trembling hand. Her painted lips curled into a vicious, highly exaggerated, mocking sneer. "I honestly cannot fathom how you actually found the sheer audacity to show your face here tonight," she hissed, her shrill voice attempting to cut through the ambient jazz music playing in the background. "Are you truly that desperate for our attention? Look around you. Violet, look at the immense wealth, the power, the sheer, undeniable scale of this success. This upper-class society is not your world, and it never, ever will be. You are a pathetic, ordinary loser who could not keep a real, ambitious man happy. You should have stayed hidden in your miserable little rental apartment crying over your lost life. Watching you try to blend in with people of our elevated status is genuinely embarrassing to witness." I did not blink a single time. I did not shift my weight or clutch my glass tighter. I simply looked down at her, examining her flushed, incredibly angry face with the chilling, clinical detachment of a scientist observing an insignificant insect trapped under glass. I offered absolutely no verbal response, perfectly allowing my deafening, unbreakable silence to amplify her agonizing insecurities until she physically had to look away. Before Stella could attempt to launch another desperate insult, a sharp, piercing ring of a silver fork striking a crystal glass echoed loudly through the massive venue sound system. The lively string quartet abruptly ceased playing mid-note. The bright, glittering overhead lights instantly dimmed, rapidly replaced by a blinding, singular white spotlight focused directly on the center of the elevated main stage. Arthur confidently stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains and directly into the harsh beam of light, sharply adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored tuxedo. He grabbed the microphone off the stand, plastering a deeply arrogant, victorious smile across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and respected members of the press," Arthur began. his voice booming with theatrical self-importance that bounced off the marble walls. "Welcome to the absolute pinnacle of my professional career. Tonight, we are not just celebrating the launch of a new investment firm, we are officially establishing a dominant, completely unstoppable financial empire that will change this landscape forever." He paused dramatically, soaking in the polite, scattered applause from the floor. None of this monumental triumph would be remotely possible without the unwavering love of my beautiful partner, Stella, and the visionary financial backing of her highly esteemed father. His brilliant decision to partner exclusively with my firm today marks a historic, highly lucrative turning point for this entire city. Arthur gestured grandly toward the front row. Stella's father, a slightly overweight man sweating profusely inside his tight designer suit, proudly climbed the short flight of stairs to the stage. He waved enthusiastically to the clapping audience, desperately projecting the entirely false image of an invincible real estate tycoon. A sleek, polished mahogany podium was quickly rolled out between the two men, holding a thick leather-bound investment contract and a heavy, incredibly ornate gold signing pen. Arthur practically vibrated with uncontained excitement as he eagerly pointed to the dotted line at the bottom of the page. Stella's father picked up the heavy pen, hovering the gold tip mere millimeters above the pristine white paper, entirely ready to solidify their fraudulent alliance amidst the swelling, enthusiastic applause of the completely oblivious crowd. At that exact, critical second, the ambient background music playing softly through the venue speakers was brutally and completely severed. The sudden, unnatural silence was violently shattered by the deafening sound of the massive, heavy oak doors at the very back of the grand ballroom being thrown wide open with terrifying force. The thick wood slammed aggressively against the marble walls, sounding exactly like a gunshot echoing through a canyon. Every single head in the crowded room violently snapped toward the entrance in pure shock. Walking slowly and deliberately through the grand doorway was my uncle. He wore an immaculate navy pinstripe suit, his silver hair perfectly and severely styled, his dark, calculating eyes sweeping over the frozen crowd with the undeniable, predatory gaze of a true apex predator. He did not come alone. Flanking him on either side, marching in perfect, deeply intimidating unison, was a formidable, impenetrable wall of 12 elite, high-powered corporate litigators flown directly in from New York City. Their heavy leather shoes struck the polished marble floor in a synchronized, militaristic rhythm that echoed like a terrifying death knell. They all carried heavy, locked leather briefcases, their faces locked in identical expressions of ruthless legal lethality. The temperature in the ballroom instantly plummeted to freezing. The sheer, overwhelming aura of genuine, terrifying, multi-billion-dollar authority they projected instantly suffocated the entire room, stealing the breath from everyone present. The polite clapping died immediately, the frantic whispers completely evaporated. The entire venue rapidly descended into an absolute, paralyzed silence, leaving Arthur standing completely frozen and utterly confused on his brightly lit stage, his hands still suspended in the air, completely unaware that his executioners had just arrived to deliver the final fatal blow. The heavy synchronized footsteps of the 12 elite litigators echoed ominously as they marched directly through the parted sea of utterly silent, terrified guests. My uncle did not even glance at the brightly lit stage where Arthur stood frozen in shock. Instead, he walked with absolute purpose straight toward the center of the room, stopping precisely 2 feet in front of me. He bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. When he spoke, his deep, resonant voice carried effortlessly across the cavernous ballroom, intentionally amplifying the heavy weight of his words. "Good evening, Madam Chief Executive Officer. The Global Board of Directors sends their highest regards. All corporate acquisition documents and hostile takeover proceedings have been fully finalized and legally ratified as per your exact executive orders." The collective gasp that erupted from the dense crowd was absolutely deafening. Arthur dropped his microphone. The harsh feedback squeal violently pierced the air, but nobody covered their ears. Arthur was staring directly at me, his eyes wide, his jaw unhinged, looking as though the solid floor had just vanished entirely beneath his feet. Stella's father, however, was not looking at me. He was staring directly at my uncle. The false, arrogant flush of the supposedly invincible tycoon drained instantly from his sweaty face, rapidly replaced by the pale, sickly ash of pure, unadulterated terror. He recognized the powerful man standing before me. He knew exactly who my uncle was. This was the senior managing partner of the exact private equity firm that held every single one of his crushing, defaulted commercial loans. The brutal realization hit him with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. His knees physically buckled, and he desperately grabbed the edge of the polished mahogany podium to keep from collapsing completely onto the stage. He was no longer a powerful real estate titan. He was a cornered, terrified animal staring directly into the cold eyes of his absolute executioner. I handed my glass of sparkling water to the nearest stunned waiter. I walked slowly toward the stage. The heavy tension in the air was palpable, and the guests practically shoved each other out of the way to clear a path for me. Arthur stumbled backward as I approached, his chest heaving with visible, uncontrollable panic. I ignored him entirely. I stepped confidently up to the podium, calmly picked up the microphone Arthur had dropped, and looked out over the massive sea of pale faces. "Good evening," I said, my voice perfectly steady, entirely cold, and echoing with absolute authority over the sound system. "My name is Violet Holmes. I am the Global Chief Executive Officer of Viridian Apex Solutions, and as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, my corporation has aggressively acquired 100% of the outstanding debt and majority equity of the real estate portfolio standing on this very stage." I signaled to my lead corporate attorney. He stepped forward, unlocked his heavy leather briefcase, and placed a massive stack of notarized, legally binding foreclosure documents directly onto the podium, deliberately covering the fraudulent investment contract Arthur had prepared. "The man you thought was funding this grand venture," I continued, gesturing coldly toward Stella's violently trembling father, "currently owns absolutely zero assets. His entire empire is completely liquidated. The funds he promised to inject into this new firm simply do not exist. My company now legally owns his commercial properties, his holding companies, and his personal private estates. He is completely irrevocably bankrupt." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked murmurs, gasps, and frantic shouting, but I was not finished. I reached into the open briefcase and pulled out a separate, remarkably thick file folder, heavily bound in red tape. I tossed it carelessly onto the floor directly at Arthur's feet. It landed with a heavy, sickening thud. "Furthermore," I announced, locking my gaze with Arthur's terrified, pleading eyes, "that folder contains undeniable, forensic proof that Arthur Sutherland committed severe felony financial fraud. He deliberately forged my signature to secure over $350,000 in illegal, high-yield mortgages and personal loans to fund a pathetic, imaginary luxury lifestyle. The firm you are celebrating tonight was built entirely on stolen money and criminal forgery." Arthur fell hard to his knees. He reached out with wildly shaking hands, desperately trying to grab the smooth hem of my silk dress, babbling incoherent, pathetic pleas for mercy. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric, Stella let out a piercing, genuinely hysterical scream. The fragile illusion was completely shattered. The absolute promise of immense wealth was gone. She lunged forward, shoving Arthur violently in the chest, sending him sprawling painfully onto the hard wooden stage. "You absolute, pathetic loser!" she shrieked, her face contorted with pure rage and deep humiliation. "You lied to me! You have absolutely nothing! You are nothing!" She did not look back to help him up. She grabbed her sobbing, utterly ruined father by his suit arm, and the two of them practically sprinted off the stage, fleeing the ballroom like terrified rats escaping a rapidly sinking ship. The wealthy investors and local tycoons who had been praising Arthur just 10 minutes prior were now violently turning their backs, frantically pulling out their phones to cancel huge checks and permanently sever all professional ties. and right on perfect cue. The heavy ballroom doors opened one final time. A squad of stern, uniformed officers from the Federal Economic Crimes Division marched straight into the room, their silver badges gleaming brightly under the harsh overhead lights. They walked directly past the panicked guests, hauled a loudly weeping Arthur up from the floor, and firmly secured cold steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. I did not stay to watch them read him his rights. I had seen more than enough. I handed the microphone back to the lead attorney, turned my back on the pathetic, ruined man who had foolishly tried to destroy me, and walked calmly down the stairs. The massive crowd parted for me once more, this time out of pure, unadulterated fear and profound respect. I walked straight out of the suffocating ballroom, through the grand lobby doors, and stepped outside into the cool, crisp night air. I took a deep, incredibly long breath, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 8 years completely lift from my tired shoulders. I was finally, entirely free. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.